Microsoft PowerPoint is a great tool to use for a visual aid for presentations. However, knowing how to use PowerPoint is not always the same as knowing how to use it effectively. Following a few simple design tips can help PowerPoint become an asset during your presentation instead of your competition for the audience's attention. Typically, one of the first things you do when you begin designing a PowerPoint presentation is to pick your background and your color scheme. Color can be a great way to add visual interest to your presentation, but try to keep the variety of colors across the entire presentation to a minimum. If you pick a different font color for each screen without a good reason, your presentation will likely look less professional and cohesive. Speaking of font color, make sure there is a high contrast between your font color and your background color. Notice that it is much more difficult to read the blue writing on the blue background than it is to read the white writing on the blue background. You also want to pick a background that sets the tone for your presentation. For example, if you're doing a presentation on world hunger, you probably don't want to use a sparkly pink background. Once you have worked out your color scheme and background, the next item to consider is your font. Sans serif fonts, like Arial, are typically easier to read than serif fonts, like Times New Roman. For example, consider these two fonts. The font on the right is harder for an audience viewing the presentation at a distance to read because of the added flourishes on the letters. Although people often like to try to be creative in their font choice, keep in mind that a simple font is easier to read. You can be creative to an extent, but remember that your audience receiving the message is always the most important thing. It's also important to keep one or possibly two fonts consistent throughout the presentation for a more professional look and feel. Font colors and background are the supporting characters for what should be the star of your presentation, the text and the images. With text, a good rule of thumb is to aim for no more than 7 words per line and no more than 7 lines per slide. The point behind this rule is not to make you obsessed with word count, but to remind you to keep your slides uncluttered. This goes for images too. You should only include an image in your presentation if it supports the topic you are discussing or the text on the slide. For this reason, photographs and images picked specifically for your presentation are always desired over picking a stock image from clip art. Finally, do not read your slides to your audience. The slide should be a visual aid for your audience to follow along with your talk. If you're reading from your slides, you put too much information on the PowerPoint. Animation can be a wonderful asset for your presentation if used in moderation. Using animation to gradually reveal information on each slide to your audience can help keep the audience focused on what you are speaking about right now. Putting the entire slide up at once can lead to the audience reading ahead and missing your vocal message. Having animated lines that appear at the push of a button can also help you control the pace of the presentation. It allows you to stop for questions or spend additional time on a point before moving on. Although animation does have definite benefits, do be careful that any animation you choose to include has a purpose. Having words flying on and off the screen without reason is just distracting to the audience. You also want to make sure that you preview your entire presentation prior to the big talk to make sure there aren't any surprises in the animation you choose. For instance, you don't want to be surprised if the clip art picture of a dancer you put in your presentation actually begins dancing while you're speaking. PowerPoint can be a great addition to a presentation. Following a few design tips and keeping the visual aids simple, clean, and personal will help you become a more effective user of this presentation tool. If you have any questions or would like any additional information on using PowerPoint as a presentation tool, please contact one of your friendly Transy librarians.